It is good to be here this evening. Good to have a few extra people with us today. We do ask that you continue to pray for those that are going to be traveling and pray for those that we've made mention of that have lost loved ones recently or are struggling with different sicknesses. I'd also remind you of several pretty good answered prayers, right? We think about several people that we've known that were struggling with cancer and the after effects of cancer, and the Lord has really made a difference for them, and the Lord has answered prayers, and we're thankful for that. All right, tonight I want to talk to you a little bit about when you are faced with calamities. What are you trusting in? Calamities, not necessarily a word that we throw around too much. I think most of us really understand what it means, right? But you could take it in regards to others having mischievous plans for you, trying to overcome you, trying to overthrow you, trying to trip you up, trying to cause problems for you. Right? Those types of things. Have you ever been in that situation? Have you ever had a time where somebody was saying things about you that weren't true, or trying to stir up others against you, or maybe just flat out pursuing you in regards to trying to get you in trouble or trying to get you displaced? You know, sometimes those things are open, blatant things. It's obvious. They're not hiding the fact that they're after you. Sometimes, as we learned a few Psalms ago, somebody speaks with words smooth as butter, but they have every intent to have a sword in the other hand, right? So I don't know the situation that you may have encountered. I don't know the situation you may be faced with. And maybe it's not somebody else that's coming against you. Maybe it's some of your own doubts and fears and anxieties. Maybe it's some of your own struggles and trials. But the psalm that we're going to read today is really good for helping us know when we're in trouble, who we can rely on. And there's just some really encouraging phrases in here. And we could read the psalm and we could just talk about those really encouraging phrases. But I want to do what we've been doing in a lot of these others. And I want to give you examples of when David was literally going through this in his life. Matter of fact, in this case, the superscription above the psalm tells us the occasion. So we don't have to guess. We don't have to go find something that was parallel and maybe it's this story. The superscription above it tells us what David was going through. And as Brother Philip had went through the life of Saul and David, some of this hopefully is fresh on some of your minds as you've heard it. But I know there's some here that weren't here during that. Some of you, short-term memory, may have forgotten some of this, so we're going to go over it again, okay? What we want to do, we're going to read the psalm, okay? Then we're going to go read the story about what this was written about, and then we're going to come back and read the psalm again. And I just want you to be thinking about it that second time in context of what happened to David. So, Psalms chapter 57. Psalms chapter 57. There's only 11 verses, so we'll just go ahead and read the whole chapter. Psalm chapter 57, in the superscription above it, it talks about it being to the chief musician, that it's of David, and it tells us specifically that it was when he fled from Saul in the cave. Now verse 1 says, "Be merciful unto me, O God, be merciful unto me." I've told you before, several of David's psalms start this way. And although David knows that in this situation, He is not guilty of what he's been accused of. He is not guilty of things. But you also should notice that when he goes before God, he is still asking for mercy. It's a place of humbleness. I think that's important that we understand. David is coming to God not in this haughty, lifted up attitude of you owe me or you better deliver me. He comes to God in a place of humility and humbleness and saying, oh, be merciful to me, O God. David understood that although he was not guilty in this case, when going before the holy, perfect God, he needed to come in a place of asking for mercy. And he says, oh, be merciful to me, O God, be merciful unto me, for my soul trusteth in thee. He can come to God in a place of humbleness and humility, but he also comes confident in stating that he trusts God. Be merciful to me. Be merciful to me, for my soul trusteth in thee. And then listen to this. Yea, in the shadow of thy wings will I make my refuge until these calamities be overpassed. How many times do you think about statements where, oh, the problem's already done, it's already over with, and now I'm going and praising God. Now I look back on what had happened and I think about, oh, I trust God. But you need to understand that when the words of this song were coming to David, I don't know exactly, did he sit down and write it right then? Did he write it a week later, a year later? We aren't told. But listen, when he was going through this, the thoughts of his mind were, while this is going on, I'm going to trust you. And I'm going to shelter under your wings until the calamity is past. Now, the picture of sheltering under the wings is this idea of, if you've ever noticed certain types of birds, chickens are good for this, right? Brother Wayne always tells the story because growing up, they owned a chicken farm. And he talks about how that, like, when another bird of prey would be coming, right, and that mother hen would cluck, and those chicks would run up to her, right? And she would fluff up her wings, and she would sit on them, right? And she'd cover them. They'd be hidden. That bird of prey wouldn't know where to go to find them. That's kind of this picture that we're given in this statement. In the shadow of thy wings will I make my refuge until these calamities be overpassed. He knows that in the time of trouble, in the time of sorrow, in the time of grief, in the time of depression, in the time of anxiety, in the time of not knowing what's going to happen, what you have to do is just flee to the Lord for help. And as long as that problem's going on, you just shelter in place underneath his wings. Now, we should be in that kind of a drawn up, close, personal place with Christ all the time. But I do understand that even when I'm not in trouble and I'm trying to draw close to the Lord, listen, there is still a difference between that and when there is trouble. And I am literally needing him for refuge. But draw up close to him until those calamities be overpassed. I will cry unto God Most High, unto God that performeth all things for me. You understand there in that verse, he recognizes where the power of deliverance comes from. I will cry to God. You know what? The Lord sends us each other to be a help and encouragement. And we can be that for each other, right? We can come alongside. We can help and encourage. We can bless. But in the end, your help comes from God. And there are times when, and I've seen people be there. Listen, there are times when I'm without words. I can't say the right thing to make it better. But I have seen how that person, even though I can't say the right thing to make it better, I have seen how they get in the Bible and they're studying and they're praying and somehow they find peace. You know how that is? It's because God is their help and God is their refuge. And he says, I will cry unto God. In the midst of my calamities, as I'm drawing up under your wings, in the shadow of your wings for protection, I will continue to cry unto you because it's you that performs these things for me. I'm not going to go over here. I'm not going to go over there. I'm not going to depend on myself. I know that you're the one that performs these things for me. In verse 3, he shall send from heaven and save me from the reproach of him that would swallow me up. Selah. God in heaven will condescend, will send help to me against the one that is trying to swallow me up. Now, I don't know what you may be faced with, but in David's case, what is it we talked about in the last few Psalms? Literally, there is a passage that says that Saul sought him every day. David knows what he's saying here. He says, he will send from heaven and save me from the reproach of him that would swallow me up. Man, Saul wants to destroy him. God shall send forth his mercy and his truth. That's confidence in those verses. Confidence. God will send forth. You know, part of the reason David was able to have this confidence, because God had made him a promise. God had made him a promise. And if David believed that promise, he knew he would one day be king, which meant Saul couldn't destroy him, because Saul was the current king. You say, well, how does that help me? God didn't promise I'm going to be king. No, but you know what? As you search his word, there are plenty of promises that he has given you. And just like that promise that David would one day be king, it was sure. It was going to happen. And David had to live his life as if that's what was going to happen. Well, you may not have that promise, but you have a lot of other promises. And listen, if those promises are to you, you can live your life like they will happen, because they will. That's the whole trust thing, right? We have to trust that what God said he would do, he will do. It says in verse 4, my soul is among lions, and I lie even among them that are set on fire, even the sons of men, whose teeth are spears and arrows, and their tongue a sharp sword. Listen, lest you think that David is just being a drama queen and he's really blowing this thing all out of proportion. I think it was Saul that had 3,000 chosen men? Mighty men, men of courage. That's who was after David. David was surrounded by men of mighty valor who were out to get him. He's not blowing this thing out of proportion. Hey, listen, you look at David's men. David had some mighty men around him too. David also had a lot of outcasts that were I don't know about some of those guys. David was 100% accurate when he said, this is how bad it is, but I trust God. I don't know how he's going to do this, but I know he's going to do this. In verse 5, he says, be thou exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let thy glory be above all the earth. So David has opened this psalm up with humbleness and humility before God. He lays his cause out before God. He declares that he's going to go to God for refuge and strength in his calamities. He's going to cry out to the Lord, right? And he trusts that God will perform the things that need to be done. He's outlined for you how rough it is and the type of people that are after him. But in the middle of that, what's his thought? Be exalted. You know what he's doing? He's praising God. He's giving God the glory due to his name. You say, well, so what's the big deal about that? He's doing that in the middle of a king and his 3,000 chosen men seeking him to destroy him. And yet in the middle of that, David can say, be thou exalted, O God. He praises, he lifts up the Lord, and he says what his desire is that the glory of God would be seen. In verse 6, they have prepared a net for my steps. My soul is bowed down. They have digged a pit before me, into the midst whereof they are fallen themselves. Now that's an interesting one there. He says, they've surrounded me, they've dug a pit, they've set a trap. And in the end, you know what's going to happen? They're going to fall in their own trap. They're going to fall in their own pit. There's other places in the Bible that use that example, by the way, about this one where you dig a pit and then you're going to be the one that falls into it. You notice in verse 7, my heart is fixed, O God, my heart is fixed. I will sing and give praises. The trust and the confidence that David has in his God, in the time of calamity and trouble, even when he's having to cry out to God for protection, he says, my heart is fixed on you, standing on the solid rock. Right? I am fixed. And as such, living my life, believing that you will fulfill your promises, I am going to stand firm, stand true, and in the midst of these troubles, I am going to sing and praise you. We way underestimate those statements because he was being pursued, and yet he was saying, I will still praise you. It says in verse 8, awake up, my glory, awake, psaltery and harp. I myself will awake early. I will praise thee, O Lord, among the people. I will sing unto thee among the nations. Now, David is saying, I am going to glorify the Lord. I'm going to praise him. I'm going to sing to him. I'm going to tell others what he's done for me in songs of praise. And I'm not going to do it hidden in some corner somewhere. I want these songs to be heard by the people. And you know when he uses the word nations here? That is the idea of even they would have said, and it is said in other places, among the heathen. The nations there means I'm not just going to sing it to my chosen 600 men. I'm not just going to sing it so the nation of Israel can hear it. I want the nations of this world to hear my songs of praise to him. Now, it is really, really neat to think about the fact that us sitting here today reading this chapter is kind of like a fulfillment of those statements. Because David said, I'm going to praise you. I'm going to sing. I want the nations to hear it. You know what a psalm is? A psalm is a song. And even though we aren't singing it today, we are taking the song that David wrote about this instance, and we are studying it and going over it. Do you think the Lord let him achieve what he wanted to do? I understand that this is an inspired word of God. The message really comes from God, but it comes from God through David. And as David was telling you what he felt and the things that he was going through in his life and the trials and the troubles and how God was going to be there for him and he was going to trust in God. And he said, I'm going to praise and I'm going to sing about you. And yet here we are going over the very song that he wrote, doing that. I'm going to give you some advice. If you say you're going to do something for God, follow through with it. Do it. In the heat of the moment sometimes, we're a people, naturally, we just have this tendency. We get in a time of trouble in a bad spot and we're covered up, we're not sure what's going to happen. And it's in those times sometimes where we'll start to make promises, we'll start to negotiate with God, we'll start to say, I'm going to do this if you'll just do this, God. Listen, you start to say some things like that. One, I would urge caution before you make too many promises. Don't promise something to God that you can't fulfill or that you aren't willing to fulfill when the time comes. But if you have said to God, this is what I want to do for you, then you need to try to do that. He even says that he's going to wake up early. I mean, this is serious, right? I'm going to wake up early to get this done. How do I say it? A reprimand to me, right? I'm so busy, I got this going, I got this going. I don't have time to do that extra thing for God right now. Well, the psalmist says, hey, I'm going to wake up early to praise your name. In verse 9, I will praise thee, O Lord, among the people. I will sing unto thee among the nations. For thy mercy is great unto the heavens, and thy truth unto the clouds. Be thou exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let thy glory be above all the earth. I'm going to wake up early, and I'm going to sing your praise, because you are a merciful God, and you are great. And your truth is above all else. And I want to declare that. And then he ends with this idea of, again, exalting or lifting up God, praising him, and giving him the glory that he deserves. So that's Psalms chapter 57. So what did it mean when it said that this was written about the time that David fled from Saul in the cave? If you would, take your Bibles and turn to the book of 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 24. Now there's a lot of things that have been going on, okay? You've got times when David has went to the priest and got the bread and the sword, and then the priest ends up getting killed because of that. David flees to Gath. In verse 22, he ends up hiding in a cave. In chapter 23, David saves a city, only to find out that that city will turn him into Saul if they get a chance. In the last half of chapter 23, David is being pursued by Saul. He's hiding in the wilderness of Ziph, and the Ziphites betray him and turn him over or tell the king where he is. By the time you get down to verse 26, David is really in a bind. It says, and Saul went on this side of the mountain, and David and his men on that side of the mountain, and David made haste to get away for fear of Saul. For Saul and his men compassed David and his men round about him to take him. But there came a messenger unto Saul, saying, haste thee and come, for the Philistines have invaded the land. So David's surrounded. It's looking like it's over. It looks like he can't get away. And at that time, the Philistines come. Saul has to leave. David is now free again. It says in verse 29, and David went up thence and dwelt in the strongholds at En-gedi. Okay, the Lord delivered. I got away. How does chapter 24 start? And it came to pass, when Saul was returned from following the Philistines. Why did he leave? Why did he not get David? because the Philistines came and he had to go fight the Philistines. David got away. What did Saul do as soon as he was done with the Philistines? Well, he went right back trying to find David again. Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi. Again, he's turned in or betrayed by others. It says in verse 2, Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all of Israel and went to seek David and his men upon the rocks of the wild goats. And it came to the sheepcotes by the way, where there was a cave. And Saul went in to cover his feet, and David and his men remained in the sides of the cave. And the men of David said unto him, Behold, the day which the Lord said unto thee, Behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thine hand, that thou mayest do to him as it shall seem good unto thee. Then David arose and cut off the skirt of Saul's robe privately. It came to pass afterward that David's heart smote him, because he had cut off Saul's skirt. Now let's just pause there for a second. David finally got away. Saul finishes up with the Philistines. Somebody says, here's where David is. He picks 3,000 chosen men, and now he's right back at David's heels again. He's chasing him through the wilderness, can't find him. Finally, his men encamp around this place. Saul goes into this cave to rest. Well, guess where David and his men were? They were inside the very cave that Saul went in to rest in. Now, I don't know if I was David and his men, if I'd be terrified or overjoyed that deliverance had been provided. They're hiding in the sides and the back of this cave. Saul's men are just outside, by the way. And now here's Saul. And suddenly somebody gets this great idea. Hey, David, God promised you some things, didn't he? This is him answering that prayer. This is him answering that promise. He has delivered Saul into your hand. Go kill him. And now you can take over. Now David doesn't do that, but he does sneak up there and he cuts off a piece of Saul's robe. And as he sneaks back to where he was, even that suddenly burdens David's heart. And he's like, this was the king. This is the anointed king of Israel. And I know that Saul has been told by God he's going to lose his kingdom. And I know that Saul is not serving God anymore. But I also recognize that this is the one that was anointed at the command of God to be the king of Israel. Who am I to do what I have done to him? But you understand in verse 5, even though that's the way David felt about it, it says in verse 6, And he said unto his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth mine hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. So David stayed his servants with his words and suffered them not to rise against Saul. You know how hard that would be? This guy has been chasing you all over the place. You can't get any rest. Every time you turn around, here he is again. And David knows he's not going to stop. Now, I think maybe at this point he might still be holding out hope. And then he does this again, and he holds out a little hope. And finally, after that second time, he's like, yeah, I know he's going to get me. I'm leaving town. But Saul, man, Saul is like a dog with a bone. He's not letting go. So how hard would it be? David's not the only one on the run, guys. David has collected these men around him, and they're loyal to David for the most part. But listen, I have a feeling they were ready to be done running too. If nothing else, their loyalty to David, because they were pretty loyal to him, was, hey, this is our time to deliver David. It's just been put in our hands. We can sneak up there and kill Saul. And it was David that kept them at bay. You want to talk about trust in God and trust in, like, I want to do the right thing. I want to do it God's way, not mine, not this world's way. I want to do it God's way. And even though it seems like this is my way of escape, I know God actually doesn't want me to touch His anointed. I'm going to leave that to God. And I'm going to trust God so much, I'll stay in my calamities. I'll stay in my danger. I'll stay in my bad place. Because I know God will eventually deliver me. That takes a lot of faith. It takes a lot of trust. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of the right attitude and willingness to do what's right, even if it means you're going to have to go through more trouble to do what's right. Now, in verse 7, so David stayed his servants with these words and suffered them not to rise against Saul. But Saul rose up out of the cave and went on his way. And David also rose afterward and went out of the cave and cried after Saul, saying, My Lord the king. And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed himself. And David said to Saul, Wherefore hearest thou men's words, saying, Behold, David seeketh thy hurt. Behold, this day thine eyes have seen how the Lord hath delivered thee today into mine hand in the cave. And some bade me kill thee, but mine eye spared thee. And I said, I will not put forth mine hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Moreover, my father, see the skirt of thy robe in my hand, for in that I cut off the skirt of thy robe and killed thee not. Know thou and see that there is neither evil nor transgression in mine hand, and I have not sinned against thee, yet thou huntest my soul to take it. The Lord judge between me and thee, and the Lord avenge me of thee, but mine hand shall not be upon thee. As saith the proverb of the ancients, wickedness proceedeth from the wicked, but mine hand shall not be upon thee. After whom is the King of Israel come out? After whom dost thou pursue? After a dead dog? After a flea? The Lord therefore be judge, and judge between me and thee, and see, and plead my cause, and deliver me out of thine hand. And it came to pass, when David had made an end of speaking these words unto Saul, that Saul said, Is this thy voice, my son David? And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. And he said to David, Thou art more righteous than I, for thou hast rewarded me good, whereas I have rewarded thee evil. Now I could keep going and read this, but you understand here what's happened. Saul is hunting him. The Lord creates this situation where he's alone in a cave with David and his men. David could have killed him. He cut a piece off of his robe. He's able to show that to Saul and say, listen, there are liars in your midst, and when they tell you that I am out to overthrow you, this should be proof to you. I'm not out to take your kingdom away from you, Saul. You're the Lord's anointed. God is going to judge between you and me. Listen, to some degree, if you look at the wording really close of David, David is not saying that Saul isn't going to be judged. But he says, I'm going to leave it in God's hands. I'm not going to give anybody an excuse to say, see, Saul was right the whole time. He was just after the kingdom. First chance he got, he murdered Saul. David says, nope, not going to do that. I'm here to show you this is not about me trying to take over your kingdom. Now, David's in danger. David's men are in danger. And in all honesty, David even going out and doing what he did put them in danger. He basically revealed where they were. But he trusted God enough to show Saul, I am not out to get you. If this keeps going on, if this continues, you and your men and my men should know by this is not about me trying to take over your kingdom. To some degree, even though it didn't stop Saul, it did take away Saul's excuse. He couldn't say, well, David's just out to take the kingdom. David proved that wrong. Even though it meant he was going to have to go through some more. So again, are you willing to do what's right and continue to trust God, even if you know what's doing right, is going to take you down a longer path. So, as you think about this, that David has 3,000 chosen men surrounding him, and the one that's been chasing him is finally within his grasp, I want you to go back and read Psalm chapter 57 again. He says, "Be merciful unto me, O God, be merciful unto me, for my soul trusteth in thee. Yea, in the shadow of thy wings will I make my refuge until these calamities be overpast." I am willing to just stay under the protection of your wings as long as this takes. I will cry unto the Most High, unto the God that performeth all things for me. He shall send from heaven and save me from the reproach of him that would swallow me up. Selah. God shall send forth his mercy and his truth. David could have taken his own action in that cave, and he didn't. He says, God from heaven is going to send my protection. God from heaven is going to keep him from swallowing me up. My soul is among lions, and I lie even among them that are set on fire, even the sons of men, whose teeth are spears and arrows, and their tongue a sharp sword. Now, to some degree, and some people disagree with me on this, I'm going to tell you that based on what happened in that cave, I don't know that David is just talking about Saul and his men. David is surrounded by men that, although loyal to him, are also violent. And some of them not always making the wisest choices about what they do. I think David understands that even some of his own men, hey, listen, he knows he's around men that are set on fire for some things. They got sharp teeth. But thou, be thou exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let thy glory be above all the earth. Two things could have happened if David would have killed Saul. Well, he may have died anyways, because listen, just because Saul was dead doesn't mean that those 3,000 men wouldn't have come looking for Saul when he didn't come back. And you don't really know what their reaction would have been to David having killed Saul. So I don't know. Killing Saul may not have, if you think it through, killing Saul would not have necessarily just suddenly made all of David's problems go away. But let's say that it did. David doesn't want this to be about him and what he did. What he wants is he wants God to be exalted for what God did. Now, if David had snuck up there and killed Saul, let's say that it would have went okay and the men would have accepted him as king. And what would the songs have been about? David and what he accomplished. David and his conquering of Saul. But in this psalm, what David says he wants is he wants God to be exalted. He wants God to be exalted. He wants the glory of God to be above all the earth. They have prepared a net for my steps. My soul is bowed down. They have digged a pit before me, into the midst whereof they are fallen themselves. How ironic is that? Because that's exactly what happened to Saul. Saul was after David, setting traps for David, trying to get David, and lo and behold, in a moment of tiredness, when he needed to go off into a cave to have some alone time, he wandered off right into the midst of the guy he was pursuing. What happened? He fell into his own trap. But he says in verse 7, my heart is fixed, O God, my heart is fixed. I will sing and give praise. Awake up, my glory. Awake, psaltery and harp. I myself will awake early. I will praise thee, O Lord, among the people. I will sing unto thee among the nations. For thy mercy is great unto the heavens, and thy truth unto the clouds. Be thou exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let thy glory be above all the earth. David was not just hiding from calamities. David was not just needing the shadow of the Lord's wings because people were out to get him. But listen, his own men were pushing him to take the life of God's anointed king. David not only stood firm and righteous, he continued to trust God, even though he knew it was going to be rough, even though he knew there was going to be hard times. He said, I'm going to stay right here under the shadow of your wings until these calamities are past. And you have to understand, when you read 1 Samuel chapter 24, David means until God causes those calamities to be past. Not until David himself destroys Saul. But Lord, I'm going to wait for your time. I'm going to do it your way. And I'm going to be faithful. I'm going to praise you, glorify you, worship you. And in the end, when I'm delivered, the nations and the people are going to see that it was you that did it, not me. That's the heart behind what's being said here. Yes, I'm in trouble. I'm going to call on you. I'm going to shelter under the shadow of your wings. I'm going to keep trusting you. I'm going to keep praising you. And when you deliver me, I'm going to make sure this world knows that it was you, not me. What is your attitude towards your trials, towards your trouble, towards your grief, towards your calamities? I hope and trust and pray that it's one of humbleness before God, understanding that you've got to take it to Him, understanding that you need His protection, understanding that in the middle of all that, you've got to keep doing it the right way, His way, and that you live in a way that trusts His promises, and that you do the right thing in the middle of all that. And when it's all said and done, and God has brought you through it, that you don't just remember to quietly praise Him, but you share that with others, that they would see what God has done for you. That why you're where you are is because of what God did for you, like David did. All right, with that, we're going to go ahead and ask Brother Philip to come and lead us in a song. I appreciate your attention.